Hi there, Ro here. Welcome to my channel, Ro Can Sew. In this episode, I will be talking through the still images of the Simplicity 8640 dress I made in 2022. I appreciated this pattern enough to have also made a version in black cotton sateen with gold metallic top stitching, which I will upload in a separate video. This video is not a pattern review nor a tutorial, however, I will be sharing my step-by-step process of making this dress. I chose this dress for its simple lines and loose fit, and the shaped hemline. I selected colors from my existing fabric collection, choosing to color block the dress. I traced the pattern in a size 12 according to my measurements. This is the tracing product that I use. I find it to be more durable than tissue paper. It can be sewn for tissue fitting purposes, and apparently can also be washed on a cold, delicate cycle, which I have not yet tried. I taped the pieces together to determine how much length might need to be removed. I took a decent chunk of length off. I'm short. There wasn't a length and shorten line, so I decided on a location that I thought would be the least fussy, and also not losing much of the original intended shape. I knew I wanted the hem frayed and would not need the allotted hem allowance. I clipped into the pattern to fold up the hem allowance. That way I would avoid cutting unnecessary fabric, yet still keep the pattern intact for possible future use. I cut my pattern pieces and started with sewing the pockets. These are lined pockets, with the outer piece being gathered to fit onto the lining piece. The number of pins I used would suggest I didn't want those gathers to move. I sewed the outer pockets to the lining, right sides together, then I pinked the edges to reduce bulk, turned the pockets right side out, and folded in the turning tabs I had created. Then I had two completed pockets. I decided they needed decorative top stitching. I selected buttons from what I had on hand and sewed them onto the pockets with my machine. I carefully marked the pocket placement on the skirt front with chalk according to the pattern's recommended placement. I used this water-soluble glue, which has a precision tip to secure the pockets before sewing. Once the pockets were attached, I moved on to sewing the upper and lower front bodice pieces together. These are cut on the bias, so I was very careful not to stretch them. And I stitched them wrong sides together, so the seams would be exposed on the outer front. I tacked down the seam allowance by sewing some decorative stitches in contrasting thread. I sewed the left and right fronts right sides together to keep the center seam allowance on the inside of the dress. I was super careful to keep the center front lined up evenly. After the fronts were assembled, the back left and right pieces were sewn together in the same manner as the center fronts. I then sewed the front to the back at the shoulder seams right sides together. I folded over and top stitched down those seams just like I did with the center front and center back seams. I wanted an exposed neck facing with a frayed edge. I sewed the front and back neck facings together. I set the facing on top of the dress front and measured out roughly how wide I wanted the exposed facing to be, so I would be sure the inner facing didn't extend into the area I wanted to fray. After ironing the inner facing to the wrong side of the facing, I sewed the right side of the facing to the wrong side of the dress, so that when the facing was flipped over to the right side of the dress, both the dress front and the facing would be facing right side up. I hope that made sense. Then I sewed a few rows of decorative stitching in contrasting thread. Next was sewing the sleeves. I sewed the sleeves on in the flat method and then flat felled and top stitched the seams, keeping the seam allowances on the inside of the dress. I sewed the entire side seam length from the dress hem to the sleeve edge, right sides together, keeping the seam allowances on the inside of the dress. I folded over and top stitched down the seam allowances, just as I did with the center front and center back seams. Then it was time for the bottom hem. I sewed a few decorative rows in contrasting thread, going very slow and being careful at the corner points. Then I frayed the ends of the dress hem. I tried the dress on and checked the sleeve length. I needed to shorten them quite a bit, so I marked where I wanted the sleeve to end. I cut off excess. I did more decorative top stitching in contrasting thread, and then I frayed the sleeve ends. Then I went back to the collar and trimmed, frayed, and trimmed again until I was satisfied with the length of the fray. Finally, I returned to the front bodice and frayed the exposed seam allowance for the front V. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this overview on how I made this version of the Simplicity 8640. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time, bye!